I read so often on various forums and Reddit threads about these new D&D players who have become unsatisfied with their game for whatever reason and who want to try something else. But invariably, these threads always produce statements like, how do I use D&D rules to run Star Wars? Or, I really want to do a Game of Thrones style game. How can I house rule D&D to do that? Well, the answer to all of these questions, as far as I'm concerned, is you can't. And not only can't you, you shouldn't. The fact is, 5e does what it sets out to do very, very well. Create a Dungeons & Dragons 5e experience. What it does not do is recreate every other genre in existence. And those who try to force the 5e rules into a different style very often fail and become frustrated. Yes, it's technically possible to do it, but there's a better way. You don't need to mutilate your D&D rules into some unyielding monstrosity incapable of providing your table with the desired experience, because there are other RPGs out there, hundreds of them in the fantasy genre alone. So let me tell you about just 5 of them. These are all games that I own and have played or run, so I'm speaking from experience here. Each one of them has its own appeal, and each one of them proves that D&D is just one way of playing tabletop role-playing games. Let's get started. Number 1, Savage Worlds. This is a genre-neutral game. It can be used for fantasy, sci-fi, superheroes, modern thriller, horror. I mean, every genre is possible, so it's extremely versatile. Their logline is fast, furious, and fun, and frankly, I think it delivers on all 3 of those things. It's a skill-based system where your skills are governed by your stats. In action resolution, the highest number on the die that you roll explodes, which means you pick it up and you roll again. So you can get some pretty wild and unpredictable outcomes, which is great for a more high adventure or high action style of game. There's also a Benny system for rerolls. A Benny is an in-game meta resource, which allows players some flexibility and protection from the unpredictable nature of the dice rolls. It also has a robust character advancement system that doesn't depend on classes or even levels. And it is a very scalable experience, as you can easily adjust the game to be as heroic or as gritty as you want. In fact, this is encouraged by the rules themselves, with many options provided on how to do just that. It's very, very easy to stat monsters and NPCs completely on the fly, and to handle large numbers of combatants. It's much, much faster than 5e to run a big fight. And it has many easy to understand options for different tactics that players can use. Now, I use the deluxe version in season 1 of my main show here on the channel, but the current version is Suede, the Adventure Edition. It's the same game, just with a few details tweaked. You can check out this link up here to see 22 whole episodes of Savage Worlds in action and get a much better sense of it. Number 2, Shadow of the Demon Lord. This is by Robert Schwab, who is one of the original designers of 5e. This game actually shares a lot of DNA with 5e, so it'll be very familiar to you D&D players out there. This is unapologetically a grimdark horror fantasy game, but it doesn't have to be. It's easy enough to simply not use the rules for corruption, sanity, dark magic, and so forth. In fact, Schwab is working on a more generic fantasy version of the game called Shadow of the Weird Wizard. I'm not sure when that comes out. But this game really does shine as a horror fantasy game, and that is a genre I cannot recommend enough. I'm a lover of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. You can see my Sage's Library episode on that up here, which was clearly a big influence on this game. The system is a pared-down version of 5e. You've got 4 characteristics for your character: strength, will, agility, and intellect. To perform an action, you roll a d20 and you add the stat mod, which is dead easy to figure out. It's basically the number that the stat has minus 10. So if you've got a strength of 12, then you're gonna roll plus 2. If you've got a stat of 14, you roll plus 4. If you've got a 9, it's minus 1. It's very easy, very intuitive. This game is a very interesting version of 5e's advantage system. It's called Boons and Banes. Each positive situational modifier grants a boon, or a d6. For each boon you have, you roll a d6 and add the highest number you roll on those d6s to your d20 roll. So if you have a total of 2 boons from various situational mods, you roll 2d6, and let's say you get a 3 and a 5, well, you add 5 to your d20 roll. Each negative modifier is a bane and is a minus d6, and it works the same way as boons. So if you have 3 banes, let's say, you roll 3d6, you take the highest number and subtract it from your d20 roll. Also, banes cancel out boons 1 for 1. And ultimately, you're only rolling either banes or boons, given how they cancel each other out. Now, this is a really flexible system that expands on 5e's advantage and disadvantage system by providing more detail and awarding situational modifiers, but it still keeps it really simple to calculate. This game also has a great initiative system. Combat rounds are divided up into fast turns and slow turns. By default, the players go first. But those taking a fast turn can either take an action like attacking or move their speed, but not both. Those taking a slow turn, which goes after the enemy turn, can do both. So there's a neat trade-off here between either doing your thing first or doing more things, providing you survive the enemy's turn, of course, which comes in between fast and slow turns. It's super fun. It's a big, interesting improvement on the random round-by-round roll-off that is D&D's initiative. I could go on and on about this game. It's a great setting. It's got expansive spell lists. It's got a great career system, which is a really fun alternative to D&D's class system, and way more. But instead, you know what? I'll just say go and check it out yourself. Number 3, Forbidden Lands. Here's the old box set. This is an old school inspired fantasy survivalist role-playing game of sandbox exploration and stronghold building. It's by Free League, which is quickly becoming my favorite RPG company. The Forbidden Lands rules are based on Free League's Year Zero house system, which made its debut in Mutant Year Zero, which is another great game. Basically, it's a dice pool system in which you roll a number of d6s made up of your attribute and skill scores plus gear dice. If you roll a 6 on any die, you succeed. So if you're swinging your sword at a monster, you roll your strength, which is say 3, with melee skill, which is say 2, and gear dice for the sword, say 1. So that's a dice pool of 6 dice. Preferably you all have different colors on them to indicate what they represent, skill versus stat, etc. Ones are bad, but only if you choose to push the roll. In other words, if you fail or you just want to generate more successes, you can take all the dice that didn't come up as 6s or 1s and re-roll them. Extra 6s get you extra successes and positive effects, but 1s cause damage to the stat you're using, so pushing is always a gamble. The journey system is really great, and it's perfect for a sandboxy hex crawl kind of game. Every member of the party can do one thing during a shift of 6 hours. One person might be the scout to lead the way into the wilderness. Another might be on lookout so as to not get ambushed by enemies. Another might be foraging for food. Oh, and yes, food and water are vital in this survival game, and I love how they're tracked. Basically, food and water, along with ammunition, are assigned a die type, like a d6 or d8. Whenever that resource is used, you roll the die, and on a 1, it's reduced a step, until finally it's reduced to nothing. This is a really elegant way to track dwindling supplies. But back to journeys. If a party member fails in their role for whatever job they're assigned, there will be consequences based on what the role was for. So, for example, if out in the wild someone fails their make camp role, well, that means the party doesn't find a very comfortable place to sleep, and then you roll on a special table. Maybe the camp is infested with ants that prevent the party from getting rest, so they suffer fatigue the next day. It makes traveling very interesting, very fun, and very perilous. I mean, getting there really is half the fun in this game. There's also a whole section on building your stronghold in the wilderness, whereby PCs can contribute to the construction of their home base and spend resources to tailor it however they want to. It's a whole mini game, which is great fun all on its own, but also it gives the party a sense of group cohesion and purpose beyond the usual character background narrative. Forbidden Lands is a great game, and I used it in my own West Marches sandbox game, about which I did a video, which you can find right there. Number 4, Mithras. This game started off as RuneQuest 6th edition, but evolved into its own thing. This is one of the great tactical combat role-playing games out there. If you love detailed, crunchy, real-feeling, and evocative fight scenes, this is a game for you. It's a D100 percentile game, so you roll under your score to succeed at something with a critical range of 1/10 the skill's value. So if you've got a skill of 75, you want to roll 75 or less on percentiles to succeed. And if you roll an 8 or less, which is 10%, that's a critical success. It's a skill-based system. There's no classes or levels here, which is a method I've always preferred. You advance by slowly improving your skills a few percentage points at a time, which gives a more consistent and realistic feel to advancement. There's no arbitrary leveling up and suddenly and inexplicably gaining a bunch of new hit points, for example. Speaking of hit points, Mithras does use them, but they are few and spread out among various hit locations. Going to 0 hit points in your left leg will have a very different effect than having your head knocked down to 0. Believe me, hits landed in combat have very real and logical consequences, something I never really got from D&D's old hit point abstraction. Now, in terms of magic, there are no less than 5 fully customizable magic systems in this game, all with their own unique flavor. Sorcery in particular is my personal favorite. It's very reminiscent of the Ars Magica system with its flexibility for spellcasters. There is also a supplement that recreates the D&D dungeon crawling feel, but with the Mithras rule set, and that is classic fantasy. If you want to play Mithras but really can't give up the old D&D tropes, well, this book will accommodate you. Mithras is a really, really robust game, and it's well worth a look for a very different role-playing game experience from D&D. Number 5, Ironsworn. Now, fans of this channel will likely be aware of this one, as it's the system I used throughout Season 2 of the main Me, Myself, and Die show. This is a gritty, Viking-inspired game that was intended primarily for solo play, but it can easily be used with a traditional RPG setup with players and a GM. There are even rules to play it GM-less in a co-op style, if that's your thing. This system is heavily inspired by the Powered by the Apocalypse games, but it forges its own path rules-wise. Actions are resolved by rolling a d6, adding your appropriate stat, and comparing that number to the result of 2 10-sided challenge dice. If your result is less than each of the challenge dice, that's a strong hit. If it's only under one of the challenge dice, you get a weak hit. And if you rolled equal to or over both challenge dice, you miss. Each of these outcomes is detailed under the basic move you're attempting, all of which are detailed in the book. Characters are composed of the stats Edge, Heart, Iron, Shadow, and Wits, along with assets, which are basically a kind of feat that 5e players will be familiar with. A vital mechanic in this game is the momentum track, which essentially charts how well your character is doing overall. You gain and lose momentum based on the outcomes of your various actions. At any point, you can choose to burn your momentum. If you have positive momentum after you make an action roll, you can cancel any challenge dice that are less than your current momentum value, which basically gives you an automatic hit. But as soon as you burn it, the momentum resets down to 2, all else being equal, and you have to earn more of it through your actions before using it again. So it's not really a get-out-of-jail-free card, it's another resource you have to be careful about spending. The game has you marking progress on various tracks based on your actions. So making a journey across a dark forest, for example, might be a difficult challenge rank, which means that whenever you mark a milestone on a journey, which is done through various exploration rolls, you mark 2 progress boxes on the chart. Once you've marked enough boxes, you make a progress roll against the number of those boxes, and if you succeed, you've reached the end of the journey. And failure for each progress track obviously has its own consequences too. Now, this is a game that took me a minute to internalize, as it's a very different experience from something like 5e, but once I did, it really started to grow on me. It's certainly a fiction-first kind of game, but the mechanics are super solid and always support what the game is all about. But don't take my word for it. Go and watch all 18 episodes of the Ironsworn Season 2 that I did right here on the Me, Myself, and I channel. And that's it, 5 great fantasy role-playing games besides D&D that you can go check out through the drive-through links in the description below, which is a great way to support the channel, by the way. And these are just the first 5 that I grabbed at random from my library. There are literally hundreds of alternatives to D&D out there, so what are you waiting for? Go check them out and find the right system for the game you want to run. Like all good things, learning a new game does take some time and effort, but it is a worthwhile way to spend your energy being able to play the game you want to play with a system that actually supports it. D&D can be a lot of fun, but it can't and shouldn't do everything. There's a whole world of games out there. Expand your gaming world and go see for yourself. Thanks as always for watching, and if you want to help support what I'm doing here on the channel, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, or join us either here as a YouTube channel member or over on Patreon, where I have various support levels for you to choose from. Also, don't forget that all of our handmade, unique, and original merchandise that we make right here in the house is 10% off through December 31st of this year, so go check it out at memyselfanddie.com. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time on Me, Myself, and Die.